Chapter 2. Nüwa, the mother of humanity, creator of life, and defender of civilization. After Fuxi passed away, his wife Nüwa took over as the leader of the tribal alliance. Nüwa is definitely a familiar name for many. It's said that she not only created humans, but also patched up the sky after a great disaster. The leftover materials from mending the sky even became the jade pendants worn by both Sun Wukong and Jia Baoyu in later stories, showing just how influential Nüwa was in history, on par with her husband Fuxi. This is why she is also considered one of the three sovereigns. Now, there are some who say that the three sovereigns include Swiren, but not Nüwa, possibly because they felt that having a husband and wife duo in a group of three wasn't fair. Maybe that's why. There are plenty of old, beautiful legends about how Nüwa and Fuxi ended up together. One story says they were actually siblings, though this is clearly an ancient myth. Both were said to be descendants of the Swiren tribe, and people believed they were brother and sister. At the time, the world was hit by a huge flood, something like what you'd see in a disaster movie, and everyone in the tribe perished. Only the brother and sister survived, hand in hand, climbing up to the highest mountain. When they looked back, all they saw was an endless ocean with no one else left, just the two of them. What could they do? Fuxi started thinking. Looking at his beautiful sister, he had some ideas. He turned to her and said, "We have to get married." Nüwa's eyes widened and she shot back. "Are you even human? We're siblings. You want to marry your own sister? What's wrong with you?" Fuxi, not one to back down, replied, "You're wrong here. I'm not just anyone. I'm a noble person, right? I'm above all that petty stuff. I've got ideals and morals. I'm not saying this for myself. Think about it. Everyone else is gone. If you and I don't get married, we'll both die, and humans will be wiped out. Look around. The only two-legged creatures left are chickens. What are we supposed to do?" Nüwa thought about it and realized, wow, my brother really is wise. He's 10 years older than me after all. It made sense, but it still felt awkward. After calling him brother for so long, switching to husband just didn't feel right. So Nüwa said, "All right, I get your point, but it's not just up to us. We need to let the heavens decide." She suggested they do some sort of divination, but back then, they didn't have tools like compasses. So how did they divine? "You go up to that mountain," she said, "and I'll stay on this one. We'll each light a pile of firewood. If the smoke from both piles meets in the sky, that'll be the heavens telling us we should marry. How about that?" Fuxi thought it over and agreed. He climbed up to his mountain and lit a fire, while Nüwa did the same. Sure enough, the smoke from both piles swirled together in the sky. Nüwa, seeing this, was impressed. It seemed like the heavens approved of their union, but she still felt uneasy. She told Fuxi, "That was one test. I've got another idea for divination." This time, she suggested they each roll a millstone down from their respective mountains. If the two millstones meet and fit together perfectly at the bottom, that means it's meant to be, she said. Fuxi thought, "This is even easier than the fire trick. All I have to do is aim right." So they each pushed a millstone down from their mountains, and sure enough, the stones met and clicked together perfectly. Nüwa was shocked again, but she still had one more challenge in mind. "Here's the final test," she said. "I'll run, and you chase me. If you can catch me, we'll marry." Fuxi, thinking this was clearly something he could control, agreed. Nüwa took off running, and Fuxi, despite being the older brother, found he couldn't keep up. She was faster than expected. Getting tired, he realized she wasn't paying attention to where she was going, just running around the same tree. So instead of chasing her in circles, he stopped and waited by the tree. Sure enough, Nüwa, without realizing it, came full circle and ran straight into his arms. She hadn't expected him to just stand still. She had no words left after that. Fuxi said, "Look, I passed all 3 heavenly tests. It's like I completed an ancient triathlon. So, what do you say? Let's do this." Nüwa, seeing there was no other way, agreed, and the two got married. Soon after, Nüwa became pregnant, which seemed pretty natural. But when she gave birth, things took a strange turn. She didn't have a regular baby, but instead, a big ball of flesh. Nüwa panicked and turned to Fuxi. "See, I told you. Haven't you ever heard of evolution or survival of the fittest? Siblings shouldn't marry, and now we've brought this monster into the world. What are we supposed to do with this thing?" Fuxi, staying calm, replied, "A monster. No problem. Watch this." With a swift strike, he split the flesh ball open. As the ball shattered, drops of blood sprayed across the ground, and from these droplets, human beings started to form. They all knelt before Fuxi and Nüwa, calling them father and mother. Fuxi and Nüwa were overjoyed, realizing they had just become the ancestors of humanity. Of course, this is all legend. In reality, they weren't actually siblings, even though they both came from the Swiran tribe. They weren't related by blood. By then, Fuxi had already made a name for himself, creating the concept of yin and yang, and teaching people how to fish using nets. Many tribal leaders came to ask for his hand in marriage. One said, "I've got the body of a goddess and the face of an angel. If you marry me, you'll live in paradise forever." Another boasted, "I may not be as pretty, but my tribe is powerful. We've got numbers and warriors. If you want a strong alliance, I'm your girl." But none of them swayed Fuxi. In the end, it was Nüwa who caught his eye, and they got married. After their union, the tribe flourished and grew stronger. With Nüwa's help, Fuxi established marriage customs, and so we can credit Nüwa for this as well. She told Fuxi that when setting up marriage traditions, there had to be clear rules. The marriage must be publicly acknowledged, there had to be a matchmaker, and the groom needed to offer a bride price. But why all these rules? If we look past the mythology, these customs make a lot of sense. They reflect a time when human society was transitioning from a matriarchal system to a patriarchal one. Let me point out something you may not have noticed. When women go shopping, they tend to browse for hours. They'll see a dress they love at first sight, but instead of buying it right away, they'll keep looking around just in case there's something better or cheaper at another store. They can walk around for so long that they forget where they first saw the dress they liked. Men, on the other hand, shop differently. If a guy wants a pair of shoes, he'll go straight to the shoe section, try on a pair that fits, pay, and leave. Why this difference? Some say it's just a personality thing, but that's not the real reason. It's something passed down from our ancestors, shaped by the division of labor. Back in ancient times, men and women had different roles. Men were hunters, while women were gatherers. If a man went out to hunt and spotted a deer, he couldn't wait around for a tiger to show up and see if it was a better catch. No, he had to act fast, kill the deer and bring it home, because everyone in the tribe was counting on him for dinner. That's why men tend to make quick decisions. Women, on the other hand, were gatherers. There was plenty to choose from. Pears, berries, apples. They could afford to take their time. Bite into a pear? It's okay, but maybe there's a better apple over there. So, they'd keep searching, checking out different options. Before the invention of bows and arrows, hunting wasn't reliable. Sometimes the men would come back empty-handed because the animals, like tigers or elephants, were too dangerous to hunt with just stones and sticks. Often, it was the women who provided the tribe with steady food sources, and that gave them significant influence. This is why, for over 1 million years, early human society was matriarchal. Women called the shots because they were the ones feeding the tribe. But as technology improved and tools like the bow and arrow were invented, everything changed. The bow was like the ancient world's equivalent of a missile. Now, men could kill animals from a distance. No longer did they have to face a tiger or bear head-on. They could take down a beast with an arrow from afar. And if one arrow wasn't enough, a group of hunters could shoot it down together. Even the most fearsome creatures didn't stand a chance anymore. Humans eating meat definitely provides far more nutrition than just eating melons, fruits, and berries. Meat plays a much bigger role in strengthening the human body. As men began to provide more food and nutrients for the tribe, especially with the emergence of early livestock farming and agriculture, men started to have an advantage over women in physical labor. Whether it was chasing down horses or deer, or plowing a field, men simply had the strength to do these jobs better. For example, plowing an acre of land required serious effort, and women just couldn't keep up with the physical demands. As a result, men's economic status began to surpass that of women, and naturally, their political status followed. The era of Fuxi and Nüwa marks this transition from a matriarchal to a patriarchal society. Nüwa explained to Fuxi the importance of establishing marriage customs, giving women a clear sense of belonging. In the past, things were more chaotic. A man would knock on a woman's door, spend the night, and leave by morning. There was no sense of responsibility. If a child was born, it was solely the woman's job to raise it. If you asked her who the father was, she probably wouldn't know, as any man who had visited her home could have been the father. Nüwa put an end to this by establishing that a woman could only belong to one man, her husband, giving her a clear sense of identity and security. In return, the man had to protect the woman and offer a bride price. After all, there are more unfaithful men than unfaithful women, right? So once a bride price was given, the marriage was locked in and no changes could be made. This shift from a matriarchal to a patriarchal society was inevitable as men gained higher economic status, and as they desired greater political power, some men began to resent Nüwa's leadership, since she was still a woman. One such man was Gong Gong, a tribal leader. He couldn't stand the idea of being ruled by an older woman. Nüwa was 53 by the time she became the leader. Gong Gong was upset and questioned, why should I, a man, be bossed around by this old woman? So he challenged Nüwa to a battle. Some people think that early societies were utopias where everyone lived in harmony, but that's not true. Tribes often fought over land, water, and pastures, and the battles were brutal because there were no rules, just all-out brawls. In their fight, Gong Gong lost because Nüwa, as the leader, had far more resources and influence, having been the first lady of the tribe for many years before becoming its head. Furious after his defeat, Gong Gong destroyed the altar used for worshipping the heavens, as well as the platform for observing the stars. This led to disaster. Without the ability to observe the heavens, the tribe didn't know when to plant crops, and the following year, they suffered great losses due to floods and missed planting seasons. Later records transformed this historical event into a myth. It was said that Gong Gong was a water god who lost a battle with Nüwa over leadership, and that she was aided by the fire god Zhurong. In a fit of rage, Gong Gong supposedly rammed his head into Buzhou Mountain, knocking it down. Now, this was a huge problem, because Buzhou Mountain was the pillar holding up the sky. When the mountain fell, the sky collapsed, creating chaos. The sky tilted to the northwest, and the earth sank to the southeast, causing massive floods that nearly wiped out humanity. Once again, Nüwa found herself alone as the last human. Faced with this devastation, she knew she had to repopulate the world. But with her husband gone, she couldn't create life the traditional way. So, she looked around and saw the yellow earth everywhere. She decided to mold humans from clay, using herself as a model. She made one figure, a beautiful woman like herself, and then another, a man resembling her husband. She tossed them to the ground, and they came to life, growing into full-fledged humans. When the first two humans knelt before Nüwa, she noticed something odd. Neither of them was wearing any clothes. That just wouldn't do. After all, she believed in promoting civilization, and running around naked wasn't exactly civilized. So what did she do? She grabbed a handful of leaves, tossed them over the two, and voila! They had clothes. Nüwa thought, well, that was easy. This is way simpler than marrying my brother. Maybe I could even get this method registered as a cultural heritage. So she continued creating people. Day after day, Nüwa shaped more and more humans from clay, thousands of them. She'd form one, toss it out, then throw some leaves for clothes, and repeat the process. After a while, though, the repetitive work wore her out. She thought, how long will this take to repopulate my entire tribe? This is exhausting. Tired of the slow progress, she came up with a new method. She picked up a long rope, dipped it in yellow mud, and started swinging it around. Wherever the mud splattered, new people sprang to life, all kneeling to Nüwa. Now you should remember that Nüwa used two methods to create people. One was by hand, and the other was with the help of the rope, which worked more like a machine. So naturally, handmade humans were seen as special, wealthy, and noble, while those created with the rope were considered commoners. That's where the saying, wealth and poverty are determined by fate, comes from. People in ancient times believed that if you were rich, it was because your ancestors were handcrafted by Nüwa. On the other hand, if your family was poor, well, your ancestors were probably flung into existence by the rope. They'd joke, we're poor because hundreds of generations ago, Nüwa made us with a rope. And the rich, they'd say, I have so much money, I'm practically drowning in it. Why? Because Nüwa personally sculpted my ancestors. Of course, this isn't my personal belief. It's just how people thought back then, part of ancient myths and legends. If you take it too seriously, you've already lost. Now, how did people get their surnames in this myth? It's simple. They were named based on where Nüwa tossed them. If she threw someone onto a rock and they stood up from the rock to bow to Nüwa, their last name became Shi, meaning rock. If they landed in the water, they took on the surname Shui, meaning water. According to legend, this is how the origin of Chinese surnames began. While I'm not entirely sure if that's true for China, I do know that in Japan, something similar happened. People's last names were often derived from the places they lived, a practice known as Myoji Hisei Gimurei. So, in this way, Nüwa created people and helped the tribe prosper. She ruled her people for a long time and lived over 100 years. Now, you might wonder if people really lived that long back then. Well, unless you can find solid evidence to prove otherwise, you've just got to accept it. There are two main ways to study history, through artifacts and through written records. Artifacts tend to be more reliable, as written texts can be altered or falsified. The best approach is to compare both and look for overlaps. But when neither is available, you just have to trust the story. It's not like you're going to dig up an ancient artifact with Nüwa was here engraved on it, right? There's no signed autograph from Nüwa lying around to prove her existence. So, if the records say she lived to be 100, then she lived to be 100. It's also worth noting that while the average lifespan in ancient times was short, that doesn't mean no one lived a long life. The average was low because many children didn't survive infancy. If a woman had 10 kids and only 2 lived to be 75, while the other 8 died before the age of 5, that would bring the average lifespan down significantly. It wasn't uncommon for the average life expectancy to be around 15 years, but this doesn't mean long-lived individuals didn't exist. After Nüwa lived a long and full life, she passed away. Naturally, after her death, someone needed to take over as leader of the tribe. Would her successor have any connection to her?